everyone! Welcome to the Dreamcatcher Podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. Human civilization, as we know it, is only about 6,000 years old. And during that time, our ancestors channeled sacred wisdom, and a lot of these teachings are still relevant today. My guest today, Dr. Betty J. Kovacs, believes that by connecting with the heart-centered consciousness and sacred perspective of the ancients, we can get to the root cause of the global crisis that we're currently facing and heal the collective. Betty is a recognized expert who has taught literature, writing, symbolic, mythic language for 25 years. She served many years on the board of directors of the Jung Society of Claremont, California. She shares her knowledge and passion through her books, speaking, teaching, and media interviews like this one. In our conversation, Betty speaks about old shamanic practices and traditions from different ancient cultures and how we can use that knowledge to access higher states of consciousness and a heart-centered state of being. Please join us as we take this journey back in time. And as always, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and rate this if you enjoyed it. Hello, Betty. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you, Celine.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm a huge history buff, and I'm really glad that we were able to have this opportunity to talk about ancient cultures and what we can learn from them. I know that you are one of the best people to talk to about this subject.
Well, there's so much history that we did not know until the last century, and many of us don't know it yet. I mean, we're just really trying to find out more each day, but so much happened in the 20th century that we need to know about, especially for what we're going through today.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, the wisdom that we can gain from the yesteryears can really come in handy right now.
Actually, yes, it can. And what they had is what we have lost. And that's why we are in the situation we're in right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we'll be getting into that.
Okay, great.
Interview.
Great.
So to start this conversation, I just want to talk about the inspiration behind your really riveting book, with the title Merchants of Light, The Consciousness That Is Changing the World. I'm curious to know, what have been your experiences that led you to write this book?
You know, in my whole life, when I was a child, I had just a feeling that something was missing. Mm-hmm. And it grew into just a deep longing to know if there was something more than just the material world. And growing up, going to school, and does nothing ever change? Do we not know more? And I had an intuition that there was something much vaster, but I wasn't sure. And it made me kind of sad to think, is this it? Because that was our worldview. Scientists told us there's nothing but matter. We are a fluke of nature with no meaning, no purpose. When you're dead, you're dead. Well, no one can really live well and creatively in that worldview. But I didn't know whether it was true or not. So that began the search to find out.
Yeah, I remember reading this book called God Delusion. Have you heard about it?
Let's see, who was the author of that? I haven't read it.
It's by Richard Dawkins.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I remember reading that and I felt so sad. Yeah. I felt like, really, is there no purpose to this universe? I mean, as random as it seems, there must be something that's connecting us.
Oh, I know. And the worldview that we have today was from science in a few hundred years ago. But scientists before that, well, they were shamans, they were mystics, and they had a completely different worldview. But when scientists began to get together in London in about 1665, I think, the church would not let them study anything about consciousness or the inner world of experience, because there had been a great renaissance of the shaman mystic culture in 1600, which was destroyed by the church and state. And so those scientists who were part of that mystical movement had to sort of tuck tail and go home. And when the Royal Society did establish itself, all of those scientists knew there was no way that they could study anything about the inner world. And so that developed into the material, meaningless world. And scientists write about it, thinking that they're truly intellectual and have all the means they need to know that. But we did not develop a science that could study the inner world. So whatever the material scientists said, it wasn't about consciousness. So if they look from a materialistic point of view, they won't find it. But now with quantum physics, those physicists look in the inner world, and they would not say what he said at all.
Okay. And just to clarify a couple of terms for our listeners, when you talk about shamanic practices, what exactly are they?
Yeah, that's a good question. Shamanism developed all around the world at about 40,000 BCE. Can you imagine? And it was a discovery through, I don't know what means, but they did discover ways to experience other dimensions of reality, which the quantum physicists today know exist, but the materialist scientists do not know. But these shamans developed techniques. One of them was dancing or chanting, and those rituals actually released, we now know, a slow brain wave that integrated the brain components with the heart. And they were able to open to another dimension of reality. There were also sacred plants. We know that all around the world, many cultures, not all, but most, used sacred plants as well as meditation and dancing and chanting in order to trigger the mind into opening it up to a larger dimension. We now know that we're all universal mind. That's who we are. That's what we are. But we have a valve, you might say, that sort of close us down so that we can go to the grocery store, cook dinner, get our kids to bed. We have to have that otherwise. But when we have a chance, then we can release that valve, and we are who we are, universal mind. But we've lost those techniques, basically, and that's why we have a material culture.
Right. And how did all these shamanic practices like chanting and dancing, how did that impact their perspective on the world?
Well, if in coordinating or integrating the various brain components with the heart, that opened them to this deep connection to other dimensions. Mm-hmm. We've just recently learned that the heart is the most powerful brain component, and that it connects us to other dimensions. We could say to spirit if we want, but it also is intuition. And our culture has made fun of intuition. Oh, that's the woman's thinking, or whatever, anything to degrade it. But our ancestors had an intuition we can't even imagine, and they also were geometrists, so they could do all kinds of things that we didn't know they could do. But it is in and through this opening of the heart that they know things about the world that we don't know if we don't feel it. The ancient Egyptians said we cannot evolve, we cannot continue to grow if we are not capable of feeling, being present in the moment and feeling. Mm-hmm.
Yes. It's clear that we've become more rational and logic driven as a society. Why do you think that's happened?
Well, it happened precisely because the scientists who were denied the ability and right to go into other dimensions of reality, and it was the church and state, and unfortunately, the people in control wanted power over people. If you go inward and you connect to your heart and you begin to experience who you are, this powerful unity of consciousness throughout the universe, then we can't be controlled. But when the scientists could not touch that, then they observed the outer world, the physical world. And so that developed the measuring, the observation, so that it developed, we had, that's what the conscious mind or conceptual mind is for. So we continued to develop that until we didn't develop anything else. We completely forgot that there was anything else and didn't care. We negated all the other brain components. Like, dream, you just ate too much. But of course that's not necessarily true. So we started focusing on that, and that's the only thing we teach in school practically, is the development of the conceptual rational brain. But even in the 1700s, there was a wonderful scientific thinker who said, no, wait a minute, there is another ability. We develop symbolic language and consciousness before the conceptual, and it feeds the conceptual mind. So, but he had no voice in that world because it was the age of the materialist scientist, and they would have nothing to do with him. So he was not listened to until we began to wake up. And every time we wake up, we remember this philosopher, and we now know that it's true through brain research.
What's the name of this philosopher?
It's Giambattista Vico, V-I-C-O.
Okay.
Giambattista Vico.
French.
He was Italian, yes.
Italian.
And he was in 1700s, yeah.
Okay. So you think that this heart consciousness should complement the rational thought process?
Oh, absolutely. There are other rational or conscious processes other than the rational, but the rational conceptual mind, let's say the left brain, it's wonderful. I mean, we've lived most of our lives with it, really, and we know all kinds of things because of it, and I love it. I'm grateful for it. But what we need to do is integrate the other brain components, and let's say, just to take one, the right brain, which speaks in symbols. And it communicates to us all kinds of things. And of course, that energy comes from the heart to the right brain, and it can speak to us in symbols, which we can feel. We actually experience it through the symbol. And then, of course, we want to think about it. There's some cultures that once they've experienced it, the symbol fully, that's it. But in the Western world, and I'm certainly Western in that sense, I like to talk about it and think about it and what does it mean? But that's very important. So the ideal way of thinking about consciousness is that we want all the brain components to work, all the way from the reptilian brain that goes through all of the brain components, and then through the heart, and then back. This is circular movement like that. We now know that the heart has a huge electromagnetic field, and that it gives more information to the brain than the brain gives to the heart. Plus, it opens us and connects us to other dimensions when we can synchronize. That's why breath is so important, to try to just get all of those components synchronized, and then we become coherent. Heart Math is a wonderful organization that has done scientific studies, but it even has a little instrument that you can use as you're doing breathing exercises, and it shows you when you're coherent, when all of the components are connected.
When all parts of you are
all parts.
Unison.
Yes. And so the whole brain is important, and the heart is a part of the brain.
I don't think most people know that they have these different components of thinking. They don't even know that the heart has a consciousness, that it has an energy of its own. I think that knowledge is lacking.
It is. And certainly we didn't think our ancestors knew anything that we didn't know. But we can't build a pyramid yet, and the megalithic monuments we now know are all around the world, as are pyramids all around the world. So there were those who knew so much that we don't yet know. But we've been a little arrogant in thinking that because we're highly developed conceptually, rationally, that we know everything, but we don't. And even rationally, we can't do many of the things that they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of their teachings have been recorded in their sacred text, and they've also used symbolic language. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. First of all, in shamanism, there is no sacred text because everyone is a unique, divine, immortal, creative being. And that individual, through altered states of consciousness, that is opening to universal mind, each one of us then experiences who we are and truths about the universe. And that is our sacred text. And of course, we can see other people's experiences and we integrate them, but what we know is what we experience. We don't believe. There's no orthodoxy. But later, people did say, well, all of us have had these experiences, let's write them down. And so they usually experience is best expressed with symbolic language because that's multi-layered. And a symbolic language, actually, that's Vico also said, that it develops first, and then out of symbolic language, rational language develops. But, you know, the heart or the psyche, we could say, is like an acorn to an oak tree. There's everything. They have all the little seeds in there. They have, in the acorn, are all of the organizing principles needed to develop an oak tree. The same is true of us, is that our psyche or soul or heart it creates stories for us that are actually developed by these organizing principles within us. So a sacred text isn't one just because someone says so. We can now recognize them all around the world because they all follow the same principles of spiritual evolutionary symbolism. And that's so important to know that it isn't, you know, whatever orthodoxy we want to come up with, we have to say, well, does this allow us to become cosmically conscious? Can we become the Christ by following these principles?
Yeah, that's great. Could you give us an example of a symbolic language from an ancient culture so that people can actually ground this knowledge?
Well, you know, fairy tales are good examples.
Yes.
You know that they're kind of concentrated symbolic language, whereas a myth will have the symbolic language in it, but also history and biography and things like that. But you know, when we start out with a fairy tale, it's once upon a time in a faraway place. That means anytime, any place, and there will often be like the forest will be there, and then there'll be a clearing. Well, you know, it's what we can see very well in the clearing, but when we enter the forest, we don't know which way to go. And within the forest, there is usually a figure like Baba Yaga or the old woman of the forest or an old shamaness. And we might stay with her for a while, or it might be animals who will guide us. But they're always animals or an individual who will give us the direction to go. Very often after we've stayed, let's say, with Baba Yaga for a while, and clearly it's a time we can't journey in that time, we have to just be there and allow the wisdom to come in. Then when it's time for us to go the next stage of the journey, she will throw out a ball of yarn. Mm-hmm. And we follow that ball of yarn to our destination. So what it's saying is, in a symbolic way, nature, your heart, your soul will guide you.
Okay. So sort of like archetypal stories, things like that, right? That have some kind of, that means something and touch on common human themes.
Exactly. There are stories that are there for our growth and development.
Like the hero's journey.
Exactly, yes. And Joseph Campbell has written a book about how that appears all over the world, is that the young man leaves the world of time and space and he goes out into the forest and he has many different types of experiences along the way. And from each one of those, he learns. And then he finds his opposite, usually in the feminine, if it's a male who's going, and he has to learn from her. And finally, there is the sacred marriage. And that means that he has brought all of these opposites and components together. And so then he can return home and tell the story to others. So it's all about growth and development, about our evolution. So these stories all over the world will talk about how do we open ourselves to a larger dimension of knowing, of wisdom.
And how does that make us more heart conscious, these stories?
Well, we hope that when we go out into the forest and the darkness, we are actually willing to give up our egocentric point of view as being the only point of view possible, and we enter into darkness. And so we are really allowing ourselves to open to something beyond ourselves. And indeed, what these fairy tales are saying, that if we do open ourselves to them, they will guide us. And certainly the dreams will guide us. Very often the person in the forest will have a dream, or an animal will come, whatever. So we are becoming wiser and learning from all aspects of nature as we go along on the journey, and integrating that which is opposite to us or unknown to us, so that we are becoming wiser and wiser. And then we go back where, to the village where no one knows these things. But we have to then try to tell stories, and we can't just dictate, but we tell stories, about how to entice one into the woods for their own growth.
Yeah. So do you recommend any practices that people can adopt on a day-to-day basis so that they can be more in touch with their heart space, but also tap into the wisdom that they can gain from symbolic language and stories, like one you just mentioned? Like, how can they do it as a practice?
Yes, as a process, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, our way of life in the Western world is pulling us always away from that, from any practice. Of course, right now we have to kind of be at home, but
yes,
we're still connecting all over the world.
Right.
And that's fine. But I think one of the most important things is to try to have a space where we can let go all of the news and the noise that's going on, and just kind of allow ourselves to be in the moment and to see what we feel like. I sometimes find I can't even breathe when at first I'm not even breathing well. And so to just sort of breathe, and you can bring down the blood pressure with breath exercises.
Start with the breath.
Yeah, absolutely, because that calms you down.
Yeah.
And then I think we all find our own ways. Some people really find an opening when they're in nature. Others, I think children who still have that light in them. I mean, my own son, and I've heard this from other parents, they certainly reminded me of just the way a child looks at the world.
Yes.
I mean, it's just,
beautiful, isn't it? Yeah.
It is.
So innocent, and so they see the magic.
They see the magic, and they are the magic. And we often think, well, they're just children. No, they know something and they have it yet. There's a very well-known Sufi teacher, Llewellyn Vaughan Lee. He's in Upper California.
Oh, yeah. I think I saw his interview with Oprah. He did a Super Soul Sunday, I believe.
Oh, probably so. Yeah. Well, he just wrote a little book that's coming out in December. And in it, he tells about a vision he had when he was 20 years old. He saw a group of children coming down the street, and suddenly he saw them as they really are. He said they were absolutely up from the heart, just filled with light. They were light children. And he said, I don't think I'd ever experienced that. And I know my parents didn't, he said. But then he said, with my own children, it ignited that in me again, that light and that. So they really are still connected, to the heart and the universe. And our culture turns off those lights, as they grow up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, with all the social conditioning, and as you go through the challenges of life, that light gets dimmed. And a lot of people tend to get cynical. So I think it's really important to continue to remind ourselves of this light that is within us, and that we can access it.
That's right. And that if we focus on the heart, heart math says even put your hand on the heart sometimes.
Put your hand in the heart. Yeah, I know that there's a meditation or something like a heart. Mm-hmm. I forget what it's called, but there are some meditations just to get in touch with your heart space.
It's true. And, the heart, as I said, has a powerful energy field. When we sit by someone or hug someone, our our rhythms began to synchronize.
Oh,
I mean, it's a magical thing. And you know, I think when we hug, well, why in the world would people ever come and press their hearts against each other? But it's a synchronization. And so if we put our hand on it, it's kind of a reminder of the energy and the movement, the rhythms of the heart. And our ancestors wanted nothing more than to know the rhythms of nature and to know, therefore, the laws of nature and live in harmony with them. It's kind of hard for us today, but they actually discovered that the human being is the mediator between the energies of the earth and the energies of the cosmos. And so they're huge megalithic monuments that, of course, mapped all of the rhythms of the sun and the moon, that also, those were places where they went and could more easily get in harmony with those rhythms and play the role that we're meant to play. We're not insignificant. We're very powerful, universal mind. And when we allow the energies of the earth and the energies of the cosmos to meet in the heart, then we become very powerful. But today we don't have those monuments, but we can think in those terms of who we are. And I think they're probably very simple. Breathing to calm ourselves down and just allow ourselves to feel what the present moment brings us. And then I think, just like in the woods where Baba Yaga brings the ball of yarn, we will be led into what works for us.
Okay. Yeah. That's beautiful, Betty. One thing I'm interested to know is about some of the specific shamans from history. I know you write about some of the cultures in Africa, some of the practices that they had. Could you tell us a little bit about what they did? And
absolutely fantastic. Yes, in the Kalahari Desert in Africa, there are still, but very few are left now. They've actually, as someone called them, are a murdered culture, but they lived in the Kalahari Desert. The few live still in parts of the Kalahari Desert, and people, I would say, white culture. You know, they're just strange-looking people in Africa, and we so disregarded them that even until 1930, South African government sold hunting licenses to go kill them. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
And we know today, however, and I do talk about them in the book, from the point of view of a white man who lived in the near the Kalahari, and the women who took care of him were San Bush women. And he just had been so impressed with their culture. But later, there was a man here, Bradford Keeney, who didn't know anything about the San, but he had an experience one day while he was playing the piano of a consciousness. It was just cosmic. He really opened to his universal beingness. And it lasted all night and into the next day. It just was so profound. But in our culture, he didn't know what to do with it. He was afraid to tell anyone because they'd probably make fun of him. But at any rate, so he went, I think, to Purdue and also to MIT. And then he became a professor in a university, and he was invited to go to South Africa to teach. 2 weeks, I think, about that time before he went, he had a dream. And the dream showed him a map. Can you believe it? It was so precise. And where he was to go, that he was to go to this place when he got there. He got a team after he got there, went to that place, and the San Bushmen were running across the desert to meet him. And they said, "Welcome home. We've been waiting for you." So he really learned all their rituals. They realized he had experienced universal mind, but he learned many of their techniques to achieve it. And they didn't sit as a yogi would sit alone in order to ignite that consciousness. They danced with each other. They held each other, touched each other, danced and chanted, so that it would be a communal consciousness that they created. But it's because of Bradford Keeney that we know that they had, and they say we've been doing this for 65,000 years. Well, that's before we know of any activity. But I think they probably know what they've been doing. But here is a group of people who discovered on their own, thousands and thousands of years ago, how to open to this cosmic consciousness and how to go back into ordinary consciousness, but then how to dance and chant and open that up as a regular practice. So yes, they were, and there were people all around the world who knew how to do this. It's too bad that the state and often organized religion suppressed that and gave us stories that were not born out of the organizing principles of our soul.
Yeah, it is. It is a shame. And I think some of that fear and ignorance still lingers on. And that's a reason why you believe that there is a loss of heart consciousness. And in your book, you say that is what is destroying the world. So tell us about that. I think that's really relevant right now, given the current state of the world, not just COVID, but with the climate crisis and a whole bunch of things.
Absolutely correct. Is that we wouldn't have had Nazi Germany, who brilliant and could make lists of how many Jews they could send to camps to be killed each month. We don't do that if we have heart consciousness. We also do not poison nature. We don't have poisons in the atmosphere or medicines that destroy our children. We have the most unhealthy generation of children that we've ever had. There are many toxins causing that, but the people who are allowing that are not in touch with their hearts. They could never do it if they saw the suffering that they were bringing about. They would never have these electromagnetic fields around the world that even hurt insects, never mind human consciousness. They would not plan on artificial intelligence, a transhumanism, if they knew that if we just went inward and developed the heart consciousness, that that's who we are, that we can open to a cosmic dimension of reality. So here we have probably extreme group of people who are deeply wounded by this repression of who we are, about the worldview that we're nothing but this. Well, if we're nothing but that, why not toy with it? Who cares if it dies or it's poisoned, or that our children are dying or very, very ill? Because if we don't feel what we're doing, we can do anything. And I think they are deeply, deeply wounded. And we need to become conscious that this heartless thinking is destroying the planet and animals and our children.
I totally agree with you, Betty. And even on a day-to-day level, like when I'm interacting with certain people, sometimes I wonder, like, I feel that there is a decline in empathy and compassion in general. And what can we do about that? What can we do to change that and create change in the world?
I ask that myself all the time. But I think, first of all, just like you, we want to know. We are feeling already. And I think that we begin with ourselves as to be as open to larger dimensions of thought and to allow ourselves to feel what is going on. Sometimes when we hear a story and it's terrible, we don't really relate to it until we start to feel what that individual is going through. And then the whole picture changes. And I think that while it seems that we're getting more and more heartless in one sense, I think that's true. But I think, and I'm so pleased with it, with the younger generation and with so many people around the world, they really are asking the same questions you and I are asking. How can we do this? We know we begin with ourselves. We can't change anybody before we've changed.
Exactly, yeah.
And we don't want to believe something. I don't want to believe in orthodoxy. And that was always my trouble. I went to a Christian college, and that was some time ago, and the professors were very open, encouraged everyone to think for themselves, and they were thorough, good scholars. And I couldn't, at the first year, I didn't go to church anymore. I couldn't believe, but I wanted to know, and they supported that. You go in your own way. You find your own deeper truth within you. And so it was a life journey I'm still on. But I think that's what we do. We do everything to be open to and find out. But it does begin with us. But I do think that so many people all around the world are awakening to the climate problem, to the heart, absence of the heart. And because if we're concerned about the climate, we have to feel. We have to have a feeling for the animals and the children to come and the plants.
And that's not always easy to do, Betty, because you do feel different. It feels unconventional. Like, I grew up in a very materialistic society. I was surrounded by a lot of materialistic people. So to think in this way was a little bit difficult because it felt unorthodox. It felt unconventional. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to have that courage to be like, hey, I'm different, and I think differently, and I want to live differently.
Exactly. And that's following your feeling, your heart.
Yeah.
You may not have any logic for it in the moment.
Yes, you don't. It can get confusing, and it did for me. So, yeah.
No, I think it's a wonderful example of how we start. It's, can I be true to what I'm feeling?
Yes.
What I want, what I long for. And that's why I had that as a child. I thought, do I need a drink of water? I didn't know what it was, but I knew there wasn't enough, And when we follow that, we find our path, and that's following the heart, and the heart will lead us.
Yes. And the mind and the heart, they are connected, right?
Absolutely. Because when I say we're led by the heart, it's that heart that is giving all of this information to the brain, and the brain is talking back. It's that cyclical thing in which all of the brain components are functioning through the heart. And so then the rational brain is working with us beautifully. And in an altered state, what is so interesting is that we are never so logical as when we're in a mystic state. You can think of things that you try to figure out when you're just using the rational brain. But when you're in a heart space, it's like you see the connections and they're true. You see it so clearly and why they connect. And so our rational brain is incredible, beautiful part of who we are when it is working with the rest of us through the heart. Mm-hmm. We never get rid of it. I mean, we need it, but it'll be very differently expressed if it's in union with the heart.
Right. And how do we express this, what's coming from our heart space? Do you think maybe practices like journaling or maybe talking to someone, does that help? Like get it out?
Oh, I do. And I think journaling is very good. I found that in writing down my dreams, that as I wrote them, I would remember other parts of it. And then I had the whole dream in front of me, and I was feeling it as I was writing it, and more would come to me. Although I've had dreams that I didn't fully understand until maybe 20, 30 years later. But that's okay. I understood what I needed to at the time. So journaling is very good. And if we have a friend with whom we can comfortably and share these thoughts with confidence, that is so good. There was one woman, a friend of mine from Ecuador. We used to, I was still teaching in that time. She had been a student of mine, as a matter of fact. And we would talk about everything. Sometimes we'd call each other 4 times a day. And, she discovered this and I discovered that. And now with Kim, you've talked with Kim, she's head of the Kamlach Center. We share everything like that. And Goethe, the German poet Goethe, said that if when you share a thought with someone you trust and they are reflecting that thought back to you, it's like taking a glass to the sun and look at the intensity of energy that's created. You can burn up the paper, but it says we create tremendous energy when we share these symbols back and forth.
Yeah. It's about finding the right people, though.
And it is indeed. It is, because there are so many people who would just dismiss it.
Yeah, think you're a little bit cuckoo.
And when I was teaching mythology in college, the students would, inevitably they'd come to me and say, I have something I want to tell you. And I have never told anyone in my life. That's our culture because we have not valued it. And yet it is absolutely the root of who we are.
Yeah.
Even the early Christians in the Nag Hammadi texts that were found, which the church was going to destroy, so they buried them, and later right after the war they were found, and they even speak of the fact that spirit speaks in symbols. It's that is symbolic language is very important. Sometimes I feel my dreams are just doodling. It must be that inner dream maker, doesn't make much sense to me. But then there are the dreams in which, oh my God, you see something that you couldn't have seen otherwise. Right.
Yeah. Betty, this has been so interesting and enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you. You and others like you are what is giving me hope. So I thank you.
Thank you. For those who are interested in learning more about Betty and getting a hold of her books, you can visit her website, kamlak.com. That's KAMLAK.com. Betty, anything else you would like to say?
Oh, only that the books can also be purchased anywhere that any books are sold, but as well as at the Kamlak Center, which thank you for mentioning. And if you subscribe, then Kim will send a chapter of the book and you can get an idea of what it's about.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Thanks again, Betty.
Oh, I thank you.
Wonderful speaking with you.
Oh, thank you. Ditto.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.